Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Diane Meridian again, and following up on our last video post regarding compassion fatigue and ultimately healthy self-care. I wanted to follow up because we had an assignment that you were going to do and I was going to do regarding taking an inventory of experiences that had impacted us over the course of our interpreting careers. And when we talked about taking this inventory, the idea was to look at it from two angles. One was the cumulative experience of the work that we do with service providers and LEPs, as well as any individual experiences that we may have had that were very significant. So that's how I chose to approach the task. And, interestingly, before I talk a little bit about the process I used, I had an interesting observation about what was happening for me. I was sitting at my kitchen table and I was getting ready to do my inventory, and I started to get kind of tense. And I'm pretty well aware of when I'm feeling anxious. And so I started to feel like my chest got a little tight. I was breathing a little quickly, and my thoughts were sort of like all over the place. And I kept thinking, well, what the heck is going on? What's the matter? And I had this realization that this message was running through my head as I was trying to do the inventory, that I had to get this right. I had to do it the right way. And I had to kind of laugh into myself, and I thought, well, geez, what is this right way that I think I need to do this? This is just a kind of a brainstorming session with myself. There is no right way. And the reason I'm sharing this is because sometimes we add stress to ourselves unknowingly. And this idea that, for me in particular, that there was a right way is probably an underlying thread throughout my whole life. So here I am trying to look at situations that, maybe have caused me different types of stress or fatigue over the years, and I was giving myself in the moment additional stress and fatigue. So once I was able to realize that, I put that aside, and it just became a much more natural task. So let me walk you through how I approached it. And I actually, in the blog post, I kind of put an example of how I did this. And once again, this was my process. It's not the process or even the best process. It was just what came naturally to me once I got over thinking there was like a right way. So I looked at it from like a macro level, sort of the cumulative experiences that I had had in different industries, things that may have been calls that may have inherently, by nature of what they were dealing with, confrontational or had adverse outcomes. And this could have been in person or even, over the phone. So I looked at it on a macro level from that perspective. And then I dug a little deeper in terms of what particular types of situations, either over the phone or in person, had really stuck out in my mind. And I also have examples of that in the post as well. And this was fascinating, and I didn't actually realize this until I did it. So I put the years down, that the years and the months when I remembered that, of these individual experiences that stuck out for me. And when I realized, using this one, like the gestational diabetes clinic, you'll see that notation. Also, the call I took I had to advise someone that their baby had passed away from sudden infant death syndrome. And then this one in the middle that I wrote, this call that I termed Guadalupe. It wasn't actually a call, it was an in-person assignment. That was probably one experience that probably changed the course of my professional pursuits more than anything. All of those things happened at a particular time in my life. And when I step back to look at that, all of those things happened when I was pregnant with my son and had my son. So I was going through these experiences in those different areas at a time when I myself was going through not a similar experience, but I was having a pregnancy, and then I was having, I had delivered my son. So I didn't make that connection that there was something going on in my own life, very specifically, that tied, I don't know if you'd call it coincidentally or not coincidentally, but those ones that stuck out for me were happening in a kind of a parallel process in in my life. And then there were another set of calls, and I talked about this in my original post, and then again I noted it here in the post, that these 911 calls. It also came really right on the heels of being at a very vulnerable time in my life. So listening to those types of calls and being a part of that was coming within the context of a broader, I guess you could say, life issue for me. So when you look at the inventory that you do or you have done, I would ask that you look at it just to see. Now, it may be it is or it isn't, or happened at a time in your life when you were feeling particularly vulnerable. Either as a parallel process, something similar going on in your life, or even something else. But sometimes the timing of situations can impact, obviously, the way that we perceive them. So I would ask that you go back and look at your inventory and see if there was anything going on in your life that made you particularly vulnerable. So that's one thing. And the reason I bring that up is, once again, we're trying to create a good self-care plan. And any kind of a plan, regardless of what it is, either personal or professional, is only as good as the pre-planning, right? And I have a long operations background, so I know that if I want a particular outcome, I have to make sure that what my input is pretty sound. And so this is very similar. If we want to come up with a great plan to meet our needs, we really have to be aware of what's going on before we start making a plan. So that would be one thing. Look back at your experiences, see if they came at a time or are coming at a time when you are particularly vulnerable to whatever is going on. So that's one thing. And I also have included, it's called an emotions wheel, or like a feelings wheel. And it's something that we use, probably a simpler version we use with the kids that we work with to help them identify the ways that they're feeling. And I don't know if anybody's seen this movie Inside Out. Kids tend to talk about their feelings in very with a fairly limited vocabulary, right? So anger, joy, fear, this is from Inside Out, disgust, sadness. But as adults who speak not only one language, but at least another language, we have access to a wide variety of words or phrases or expressions that can capture the way that we're feeling. And so I would also like you to go back to your inventory and try to identify the feelings that you had or are having relative to the situation that you identified as being particularly significant for you. And doesn't have to all be in the same language. I would say pick the words and the expressions in whatever language most accurately captures how you're feeling. And we're language professionals, so the idea is to be as creative with our expression as possible. So 2 tasks as a follow-up to your inventory. Go back and look at if these are happening or were happening at a particular time in your life where you were, I'm going to use the word vulnerable. And secondly, try to identify the feelings that you had or are having relative to that situation. And I would say get as specific as possible, as specific as descriptive, because once again, if we want to create a good plan, we really have to understand where we're at. I'll come back in a following video post and we'll take the next step. So good luck, and I will talk to you soon.